Welcome! It has been quite a long time since I created a tutorial or an introductory video, so I'm happy because this is a great excuse to introduce a new tool that I wrote for you guys that is called the Gamma Central. The Gamma Central is one of my mini apps that I provide on the Gamma Optimizer room, but this one in particular, because it's very sophisticated and really specialized, this one is only available to subscribers, so if you unsubscribe you won't be able to use it, as opposed to the other mini apps that are free for everyone that wants to use them. So but it really doesn't matter, don't worry. If you want to test it and check it out, just subscribe and get a free trial for 7 days and you can test the tool and see if it's for you or not. I love the tool is really nice. I gave a short presentation about it this afternoon on the live video for the Gamma Optimizer trading room, but here is the full intro, and the tool is very advanced, so I'll start with the easy topics first, and probably in a second video we'll cover the more advanced ones. But the idea is kind of to show in this video what the tool does, and then later on we can explore in more detail how can it be useful to us. So to start the tool, you need to be on the Gamma Optimizer room, and here on the same Gamma Optimizer page you will see links to all the mini apps, and you will see a link to the Gamma Central tool. This is the link, so we click on the link and it looks very simplistic. I love simplistic tools. There is nothing on the screen. It is kind of prodding us to do something, and let's work with GDX. That's the default symbol. So I'm going to give you a tour of what it displays. So on the volatility page we get three interesting components. We get a variance risk premium table, we get a term structure of GDX options, and finally we get the volatility cone for GDX for the last 7 years. If you really know options and you're a very advanced option trader or professional option trader, these three charts will be very familiar to you. This is you will feel right at home. So this is kind of the advanced part of the tool. However, it's not that complex. As you say, it takes a little bit of time to talk about them, but for now let's just indicate that the tool will produce these three tables for you, and they are very useful, and I'll come back to them later on. So this is the volatility tab for the tool. We have the open interest tab. So this one is simpler and I can explain it quicker to you. The open interest is basically gathers all of the option open interest information for the underlying that you have, and you get a couple charts. You get a chart that shows you the distribution of open interest by date, so you can explore and see what are the expiration dates that have more activity on them. So for instance, in the case of GDX, you can see that January 19, 2018 is the most is the expiration with most contracts open so far. So and you can see discriminated by calls and puts, and right here I'm showing on the thousands. So this gives you an idea how trading on GDX happens. I mean, there is a bunch of open interest here, but it dwarfs in comparison with the January expiration. It has been a very active expirations all year long, basically. You can also see the open interest by strikes. So you can see what are the strikes that are having all the activity, and you can see right here this is the total open interest across every single possible expiration. So it's like the consolidation. This is the consolidated open interest. So you can see, for instance, that the 20 puts are the ones that have most of the open interest. It dwarfs the calls, and the calls, the 23 calls are also kind of highly traded. And if you have a couple filters here. You can move the strikes and slide them. You can slide here. You can focus on a particular area that you want for the open interest. And a second filter that you can do is, instead of seeing the consolidated open interest for all of the expirations, you can focus on a particular expiration. For instance, we could focus on the January 19 and see what is going on there. So we can focus on the January 19 and it shows you the open interest for January 19. And you can see that the 20 puts are really active there. The number that you see is by the thousands. So This means that there are 73,000 puts struck so far on the 20 strike, and for calls it's kind of even between the 28 and the 35. I guess these are really optimistic people for next year. They are waiting for that mythical wave 3. Let's see if they can have it. And again, you can filter these things and focus in the area that you want. So this is kind of the open interest. I know some of you subscribe to theories that expirations happen, that open interest at expirations have some meaning. I really don't see how, but for those of you that love to follow Max Payne and things like that, well, you can quickly see it graphically. For instance, for next week, let's check for next week. So you can see that in terms of calls for next week, 23 call is the most active, the most open interest is on that one, and basically no puts whatsoever, very small puts for next week. So lots of optimism for next week for those of you following this. I'll come back to expiration, but let's move on to volume. On the volume tab is this exactly the same information, but this is different. The open interest information is pretty static. It remains the same during the day because the Opera only updates open interest late during the night, like 3 in the morning. So it doesn't change during the day. It's like once all the contracts are settled, that information is updated. Volume, on the other hand, updates real time. So if you're using this tool during the day, you will see volume changing consistently. So because I am using it after the close, then I am seeing the total volume for the day. So you can see what happened during the day here. You can see, for instance, that where the strikes, the most active strikes today across all expirations. So the most active strikes were, who will have guessed, the 20 puts, the puts for 20 in GDX. The 21 puts, I guess everyone was very, if we cannot assume that they were bought or sold, but let's for simplicity assume that most people are buying the options here, but you don't know. I mean, no one knows if the options are being bought or sold, but it gives you an idea of what kind of trading we got today. Also, we can see all the expirations that were traded today for GDX. You can see that July 21st was a very active expiration, in particular with puts. I guess everyone is preparing for the end of the world in GDX for July 21st. Again, that's assuming that those puts are being bought. This only shows me the amount, but not the strike. But we can explore it. We can explore here, and we can go to July 21 and see what is the strike. And I bet it's the 20. Yes, the 20 strike. 20,000 contracts. This is a favorite number for some reason. So this is a kind of very handy chart, and this chart is super handy. You can see in real time, or at the end of the day, you can see consolidated what are the expirations that people were trading, and you can see also the strikes and focus on them and do interesting things. So this is for the easy part of the tool. And this is very useful. I mean, really, really useful. You want to see what liquidity is, and if you want to see also, you have your own theories of how open interest affects options and the price of the underlying. We can look at let's look at another underlying. GX seems to be really tame. Let's look about something more active. Let's look about Tesla and see what happens. So you can switch the underlying, and Tesla seems to have a more complete set of strikes and expirations. Also, you can see the open interest is substantially higher too. Again, the options for January 18, I guess this is the way professional people trade. They trade really long term, and you can see all of the puts that Tesla has on January 19, 2018. So, and we can see, let's look at what happens there, like how all those things are distributed that day. And yes, it looks that it's very bearish. In fact, look at these puts at 20 strike. I don't know who is buying puts at 20 strike, or maybe they were sold, or they are part of a more complex strategy here. But you can see there's lots of interest on the 100 puts. These are the puts that are they have more interest on on January 19. And you can see the calls. Well, the calls also have some interest, but not as huge as the puts. So I guess if we assume that puts are being bought in Tesla, there's lots of bearishness there for the company. Also, in terms of strikes, as you can see the same. You can see the 50 strike is one of the has lots of open interest. Probably the highest open interest is on the 50 strike. And in terms of calls, you can see that the 400 strike is the one that has most interest on calls, and you can play with the same thing, and you get the idea. Let's check on volume here in Tesla quickly, and this is very typical of single names. Most of the activity is on the more immediate expiration. Usually with these momentum stocks, this is something very common. So notice how today the options that expired today were the most active. You got lots of calls and lots of puts today. So it's an interesting thing to see when you have momentum symbols like Tesla. And finally, let's take a look at GLD. This tutorial is good for looking at certain things, and let's look about open interest here. Gold seems to be a little bit more spread in terms of open interest, and I guess well, again, January is the one that dominates the open interest, but notice how calls tremendously dominate the open interest for gold. Again, this could be very complex strategies going on. There could be lots of call sellers and extracting premium, but at least it gives you an idea where most of the activity is happening. And the same with the strikes, gives you an idea on what kind of strikes are really active. It's interesting that the 200 strike is so active. This is very interesting. It has lots of contracts on open interest, and also let's see, this one, the 125, which is near where we are right now. So that's kind of the presentation for volume and open interest. Now let's move into the interesting part of the tool. The interesting part of the tool is the variance risk premium tables and the term structure and the volatility cone. So this is the meat of the software, because this kind of information is useful for professional traders. I guess when you trade options, the main question is, what is the regime that we are right now for the particular underlying? In other words, are these options expensive or are they cheap? This is a fairly basic question that is very hard to answer just by looking at prices or just by looking at volatility. In order to answer that question, you need more specialized tools to figure out what is the volatility regime that the underlying is having right now. And hence, this is why these particular charts come very handy to determine that. So the first tool is called the Variance Risk Premium table. The Variance Risk Premium is a way to compute the difference between implied volatility and realized volatility on underlying. Of course, realized volatility is something that is impossible to quantify as a single number. You have to define realized volatility of what. So for the variance risk premium, the table is computing the realized volatility for a similar period to the option. So if the option is expiring, for instance, a month from now, then we compute the realized volatility for the last month. If the option is expired a year from now, then we compute the realized volatility from the previous year, and so forth and so on. So as you can see, the variance risk premium is computed based on recent volatility of an equivalent period. And how is implied volatility computed? So it's called VIX, like the VIX that you see on any retail platform, is the CBOE computation. So using model-free computations, we compute the VIX value for every expiration. So it gives us an idea of implied volatility, model-free implied volatility for every expiration. And then on this other column, we compute the historical volatility on the same equivalent period. So for instance, to the 14, there are 7 days, 7 calendar days. So the historical volatility is from the past 7 calendar days. So you can see that the VRP will have a number positive or negative. That number is the percentage difference, is the relative difference between the two. It's not the subtraction, but just how in percentage terms the implied volatility is higher than the historical volatility. In this case, it's not higher. In this case, it's smaller. So you can see that there is a negative variance risk premium. So in general terms, this means that, for instance, for next week, implied volatility of GLD, gold options, the gold ETF are relatively cheap compared with the recent implied volatility. So if you look only at this number, you will be tempted to buy them based on they are actually really cheap. And you can see how it changes. You can see how the percentage of overpricing varies with expiration. We have some expirations that are really expensive. For instance, on December 15 is very expensive because it's charging 30.95 and implied volatility, yet in the same period on the past 6 months or something, we only have 10% realized volatility. So even though the options look very expensive, but in implied volatility terms and also in terms of variance risk premium. So this number is a percentage. This means that options are 38% overpriced with respect to historical volatility. So this table right there gives you an idea of the regime the implied volatility is when compared with recent realized volatility. So that's the first kind of like the first data point that you have to know my options are overpriced or underpriced with respect to recent volatility. Why is this useful? This is useful if you really quickly want to, just with your eyes, you want to figure out what is the best expiration for your particular thesis. If your thesis is calling for buying options, like you are going to be a net buyer of options, you should pick something on the target duration that it has a low VRP. That's what you do when you buy. So it's kind of a quick way. Okay, I want to buy options around the end of the year, so the best thing to do is probably October because it has a lower VRP than the rest. And vice versa, if you are a net seller of options, if your position tends to be short gamma, then this helps you determine what are the months where is like the implied volatility is farther, and so you can extract more premium with less risk based on recent historical volatility. And that's only the variance risk premium. I have a whole video in YouTube about this and how to read it, so I will refer you to the variance risk premium video if you want more information, but the tool is computing this for you really quickly. Let's move to the second chart, which is called the term structure. The term structure is used basically this column, the VIX column, plot against the expiration in days. So instead of seeing dates, I see how many dates until expiration, and you can see kind of the familiar shape. In the case of GLD, I guess the term structure is all over the place. But you can see it's kind of in contango where the near term is lower than the farther term, although here in this area, the near term, there is a mini inversion, and I guess it's just based on the recent events that have happened in gold, probably the massive moves we got in the past couple days that have bumped the term structure in this way. But it should not be, most of the time it's going to be in a smooth term structure. I can use a different underlying later on to compare. But let's move to the volatility con. Oh, well, what is the term structure useful? Well, the term structure is useful because sometimes you want to do pure implied volatility trades. So the variance risk premium table is a very good table if you are trading the differential between realized and implied volatility. But sometimes you can structure trades that are only dependent on the relative difference between implied volatilities. So for those kind of trades, the time structure is very useful because let's see, this is the 41-day option, and it has 12.66% volatility, and the 48-day has 11. So if you want to exploit the differences, you could sell implied volatility at this date and buy implied volatility at this date, and you will capture the differential independent of realized volatility. There are ways to structure the trade for that. I mean, there are ways to really capture the difference, and the term structure can help you with that. And you can see when the market is looking for something anomalous. The volatility cone is something a little bit more complex. The volatility cone is a very useful tool, and I think is the main tool that I use and all the professional traders use to establish what is the current regime compared with the historical context. So this volatility cone is based for 7 years. I like 7 years because I like the number, and also because by coincidence 7 years means 2010 and up. So I want to skip the crazy 2008 2009 that really skews the whole volatility cone, that makes them look crazy. So 7 years is good enough, and also 2010 is a good year to start looking at this. So what is the cone? Well, the chart does look like a cone. And it measures, it is presenting 3 pieces of information, well, 4 pieces of information. It's presenting realized volatility in intervals. So you have the realized volatility for 7 days, 14 up to 360. So I have these ranges of realized volatility, and across the 7 years I am going to measure like the maximum value, the minimum value, and the mean value. So let's look at the 360. It's almost 1 year out. So in gold, 1 year out, the maximum volatility we have observed for the past 7 years is 20%, and the minimum volatility is 11.4, and the mean volatility is 16.7. So it gives you kind of an idea. If you are preparing a trade that will last 1 year out, it gives you an idea of the range of realized volatility you are going to have, and it gives you an idea of the type of hedging you have to perform, and all sorts of interesting things. Also, you notice that as the time interval that you plan to trade, it gets closer to our current day. For instance, if you look at 150 days, notice how volatility is higher, because volatility tends to be high on the near term. So now the maximum value is 27%, and the minimum value is 9.93, and the mean is 16. The mean is kind of stable. But you notice it's getting higher and higher. For instance, at 7 day, the maximum volatility is 66%, which means that probably in the past 7 years, during a 7 day period, we got a crazy move in GDX, and that's why you will expect. So if you are setting up a trade that only lasts 7 days, you have to be prepared for tremendous amount of volatility. But it's very unlikely that you see it, but we saw it once, no? And the same with the minimum value, like 3% volatility. But again, the most useful measure is the mean. 14.79% volatility is the mean. But this one in itself is very useful, but it's more useful when you compare it with the options. The dark line here, the black line, is the line that represents the implied volatility for the options. And you can see how option dealers are pricing GLD options substantially below the mean for the past 7 years. So options, from here, you can tell right away that in general, options are underpriced. Or let's say it another way, let's say that option dealers are pricing options substantially lower than the last 7 years, because they have their expectations is that the future realized volatility is going to be below the mean realized volatility. So this gives you an idea of what options dealers are expecting on the aggregate for a particular underlying. And this is good news. I mean, if you are doing something that your thesis is that there is not going to be that much volatility in the underlying, then this confirms that thesis. This confirms, I say, okay, at least the option dealers that are really sophisticated traders, and they are really handy people, they know how to price options, they are pricing them kind of below the historical mean. So it's kind of a nice touch if you see something like that. Let's try with something different. Let's try with SPX. Let's load SPX here and see what kind of profiles we can see. So, okay, so in SPX, I want to highlight a couple things in the market. I want to highlight how near-term implied volatility, the variance risk premium on the near term is all negative, and the variance risk premium is all negative because we got massive moves in the past days, and yet the implied volatility of options is substantially below those moves, because option dealers are not expecting that the market will continue doing that. So the negative BRP here is giving you an idea of the expectations in the near term of option dealers. The table is very handy. You will start finding incredible uses for it. Look at the term structure of SPS. This is a really smooth term structure, and this is what I want to see. I want to see implied volatility that starts really low and starts getting higher. This is a contango regime, and is what you want to see when the market is not expecting anything. The market is not expecting a single disruption next week, as I mentioned in my video. Market is not expecting a nuclear attack in any place. The market is not expecting war or trade barriers or anything like that. The market is the most complacent market in the whole history. So, and look at the level, 6%, 8%, 10% is incredibly low. The first 100 days is like nothing, it's super low. But more than the term structure, let's look at the volatility con. The volatility con is the one that I want to see here, because it follows the same shape that we saw. However, notice how option dealers are pricing the options different. So in the near term, options are priced below the mean, which is nice. I guess from here until like 60 days, market is not expecting anything. But then after 60 days, the options are getting more and more expensive, and then they start to depart. Long-term options are more expensive than the mean, and that carries a lot of information, and they are not only more expensive, they are substantially more expensive than the mean volatility we have seen. And what is carrying right there is that the expectations of volatility probably around 150, 145 days. So those expectations in the next 4 months, after 4 months of volatility, they're expecting substantially higher volatility. And that probably coincides with September, October. And that's kind of like what happens in the market. September, October is really volatile month, and which you'll expect to see some fireworks around that. At least that is what option dealers are pricing. So the volatility con is useful to see those kind of things. Finally, let's look for something crazy here that will give us let's look at Tesla again. So Tesla is a crazy underlying. The time structure looks crazy, beyond crazy. Time structure looks crazy because it's almost flat. This is clearly an outlier. Probably data is not correct for this expiration, because probably there is like no open interest here, and it's bringing down the implied volatility, but it should be around here. This bump is earnings, so this is a IB bump for earnings, and then it's kind of flat. So this kind of term structure presents good opportunities to trade volatility, in particular to trading around earnings, but with strategies that are more non-directional, and it's probably like selling volatility, near-term volatility, and buying further out volatility and waiting for the curve to normalize, if it ever happens, if it ever normalizes. And the volatility con is also showing how options are pretty much priced right there on the historical mean, with the exception of the outliers. So the option dealers are being kind of practical, and they are just pricing the options to whatever the mean was. So it's kind of fair price options right here. So this is it for the introductory video to the Gamma Central. The tool these tools, the variance risk premium, the term structure, the volatility con, and the open interest and volume information together provide an incredible view of the options market for any underlying. So please give it a try, play with it. You will discover more advanced strategies, how to use this information in a more advanced way. And in the future, I will provide a YouTube video that is more advanced on how to actually use this for real life trading. But in the meantime, this is kind of an introduction, so you get acquainted with the tool, you play with it, and you see how all these things evolve in real time, and what you can do. So I hope you enjoy the video, and thank you for watching.